There comes a sacred moment when the fortress you build to protect your heart becomes a very prison that suffocates your soul. Raise your hand if you've ever pushed away someone you actually wanted to keep close. Keep it up. Don't be shy. Look around. See how many hands are raised. This is the human condition. We are creatures of profound contradiction, building walls with one hand while reaching for connection with the other. But tonight, we're talking about something far more specific and far more painful. We're talking about that earth shattering moment when someone who has mastered the art of emotional distance suddenly realizes they want back the very person they pushed away. Not just anyone. This person, this specific soul, who saw through their defenses and loved them anyway. Sarah thought she had it all figured out. She was 32, successful, independent, and proud of her ability to keep relationships at arm's length. She'd perfected the dance, get close enough to feel desired, distant enough to stay safe. When Marcus came into her life, with his patient eyes and steady presence, she followed her usual pattern. 3 months of bliss, followed by the familiar panic. The walls went up, the arguments began. She became critical, cold, unavailable. Within 6 weeks, he was gone. For 2 months, Sarah felt vindicated. See, she told herself, everyone leaves eventually. At least I controlled the timing. She threw herself into work, dated casually, posted pictures of her fabulous solo adventures. She was living proof that you don't need anyone to be complete. Then it happened. She was sitting in her perfect apartment, surrounded by her perfectly curated life, when a song came on the radio. One Marcus used to hum while making breakfast. The facade cracked. The carefully constructed story she'd been telling herself shattered like glass hitting concrete. In that moment, Sarah realized something that terrified her more than any vulnerability she'd ever faced. She didn't want to be right about love being temporary. She wanted to be wrong. She wanted Marcus back. But here's what Sarah didn't understand, and what most people who push others away don't understand. Avoidance isn't a character flaw. It's not weakness disguised as strength. Avoidance is a highly sophisticated survival mechanism, developed by a brilliant mind, trying to protect a tender heart from annihilation. Think of a tree growing on a wind-swept cliff. Year after year, harsh winds batter its trunk, so it learns to bend, to grow at angles, to develop a thick bark and deep roots that anchor it to the rock. This tree doesn't grow tall and straight, like the trees in the valley, but it survives, it endures. The tree isn't broken, it's adapted. This is what happens to humans who learn early that love equals danger. Maybe you had a parent who was there one day and gone the next. Maybe you trusted someone completely, and they betrayed that trust. Maybe you watched the adults around you use love as a weapon, withholding it when they were displeased, showering it when they needed something. Your brilliant mind learned to survive in that environment. You developed strategy. You learned to read emotional weather patterns with the accuracy of a meteorologist. You discovered that if you don't get too attached, departures don't devastate. If you don't reveal too much, you can't be rejected for who you really are. If you leave first, you maintain the illusion of control. But here's what your protective mind didn't calculate. The very mechanisms that kept you safe in childhood become the barriers that keep love out in adulthood. The thick bark that protected you from early wounds now prevents the nourishment of genuine intimacy from reaching your. Who in this room has ever loved someone who seemed to have an invisible force field around their heart? You could get close, but only so close. Just when you thought you were breaking through, they'd find a reason to create distance. They'd pick a fight, become unavailable, or simply disappear emotionally while remaining physically present. You weren't imagining it. That force field is real. It's made of neural pathways carved deep by years of practice, reinforced by every time emotional distance provided relief from the terror of potential loss. But here's where the spiritual dimension reveals itself. Your soul, that eternal unbreakable part of you, didn't choose this incarnation to play it safe. Your soul came here to expand, to love, to experience the full spectrum of human connection. Every person who enters your life carries a piece of the spiritual puzzle you're here to complete. The universe operates on laws as precise as physics. One of these laws is that we attract people who mirror our internal world back to us. If you're terrified of abandonment, you'll attract people who trigger that fear, either by being unreliable or by being so wonderful that the thought of losing them sends you into panic. If you believe deep down that you're too much for people to handle, you'll attract those who confirm this belief by pulling away when you show your full self. But here's the sacred secret. These aren't punishments. They're opportunity. Every relationship that triggers your avoidance patterns is offering you a chance to heal what was wounded, to grow what was stunted, to complete what was left unfinished. Marcus wasn't just a man Sarah pushed away. He was a mirror showing her that her belief everyone leaves was creating the very abandonment she feared. He was a teacher offering her the curriculum she needed most, learning to stay present when love feels too good to be true. When you begin to see relationships through this lens, everything changes. That person who made you want to run, they weren't torturing you. They were inviting you to evolve. They were offering you the exact medicine your soul prescribed for its own healing. This is why that moment of recognition hits so hard. It's not just I miss this person. It's I see what this person was offering me, and I threw it away because I was afraid. It's the devastating realization that you've been running from the very thing your deepest self was seeking. But let's talk about what that moment actually feels like. Because if you've experienced it, you know it's unlike anything else in human experience. It usually starts in the body. Maybe you're going about your normal day when suddenly there's a hollow sensation in your chest, like someone reached in and scooped out something essential. Your stomach drops, as if you're falling from a great height. Some people describe it as a physical ache, others as a sudden difficulty breathing deeply. Then comes the mental shift, the carefully constructed narrative you've been telling yourself. I'm better off alone. They weren't right for me anyway. I don't need anyone. Crumbles like a house of cards in a hurricane. Suddenly you see your avoidance for what it really was. Not strength, but terror wearing a disguise. You remember their laugh, not just the sound of it, but how it made you feel. Lighter, more yourself than you'd been in years. You remember how they looked at you, really looked at you, seeing past your defenses to something tender and worthy underneath. You remember feeling, perhaps for the first time in your adult life, that you could stop performing and just be. And then comes the spiritual awakening. Though you might not recognize it as such, you realize that pushing them away wasn't protecting your independence. It was blocking your capacity to love and be loved fully. You understand that true freedom doesn't come from needing no one. It comes from being whole enough to choose someone from love, rather than from love. This realization can feel like spiritual death and rebirth happening simultaneously. The person you thought you were, self-sufficient, above the messy complications of deep attachment, dies. In its place emerges someone more vulnerable but infinitely more alive. Sarah described it as watching herself from outside her body, seeing clearly for the first time how her fear had been driving the bus of her life. She could see every moment she'd chosen distance over connection, every time she'd prioritized safety over growth, every opportunity for love she'd sacrificed on the altar of self-protection. But here's what's beautiful about this moment of recognition. It only comes when you're ready for it. Your soul doesn't reveal this truth until you've developed enough strength to handle it. The very fact that you can see your patterns means you're ready to change them. This is where the real work begins. Recognition is just the first step. Now you must learn to rewire neural pathways that have been reinforced for years or even decades. You must learn to tolerate the discomfort of being seen, of staying present when every instinct screams at you to flee. The first practice is learning to sit with discomfort without immediately moving to resolve it. Every time you feel the urge to create distance through picking a fight, becoming busy, or finding fault with the other person, pause. Breathe. Ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen if I stay present right now? Often you'll find that the fear is not about the current moment, but about an echo from the past. Your nervous system is responding to an old wound as if it were a present danger. Learning to distinguish between then and now is crucial for breaking free from avoidance patterns. The second practice is daily meditation on opening the heart center. Sit quietly and place your hand on your chest. Breathe into this space and visualize it expanding with each inhale. Notice any tightness, resistance, or pain that arises. Don't try to fix it, simply acknowledge it with compassion. Say to yourself, this pain protected me when I needed protection. I honor it and I'm ready to learn new ways of being safe, while staying open. The third practice is journaling about your avoidance patterns with curiosity rather than judgment. Write about times you've pushed people away. Instead of criticizing yourself, try to understand the younger part of you that learned these strategies. What was happening in your life when you first learned that distance equals safety? What would you say to that younger self now? The fourth practice is gradual exposure to vulnerability in safe relationships. Start small. Share something slightly more personal than usual with a trusted friend. Notice your urge to immediately deflect or change the subject. Stay with the feeling of being seen. Practice receiving care without immediately giving something back to balance the scales. The fifth practice is learning to distinguish between intuitive wisdom and fear-based reaction. Sometimes pulling away from someone is genuinely wise. Perhaps they're not emotionally available or they've shown you through their actions that they can't be trusted. But sometimes pulling away is just old programming. Learning to tell the difference takes practice and usually requires support from someone who can offer perspective when you're too close to the situation to see clearly. As you begin this work, something magical happens. The very thing you were afraid of losing, your sense of self, your independence, your safety, actually becomes stronger. When you're no longer spending massive amounts of energy maintaining emotional walls, that energy becomes available for creativity, growth, and genuine connection. You start to understand that love doesn't diminish you, it reveals more of who you really are. Instead of losing yourself in another person, you find parts of yourself that were hidden behind the walls you built. Instead of becoming dependent, you become interdependent, able to give and receive support without losing your center. This is the paradox at the heart of all spiritual growth. Only when you stop grasping for control do you become truly powerful. Only when you stop running from love do you become worthy of the love you seek. Only when you heal your relationship with vulnerability do you become strong enough to create the lasting connections your soul craves. The person you pushed away, whether they return to your life or not, has already given you the greatest gift. They've shown you exactly where your growth edge lies. They've reflected back to you the places where you're still protecting wounds, instead of healing them, still choosing safety over expansion, still operating from fear instead of love. And now you have a choice. You can return to your familiar patterns, convincing yourself that independence is superior to interdependence, that safety is more important than growth. Or you can step into the terrifying, exhilarating work of becoming someone capable of sustaining the love you claim to want. The moment of recognition as just the beginning. It's the crack in the fortress wall that lets the first ray of light through. But light, once it enters, has a way of illuminating everything. It reveals not just what you've been protecting yourself from, but what you've been protecting yourself for. What becomes possible when you're no longer spending all your energy on defense. Your avoidant patterns didn't develop overnight and they won't disappear overnight, but every day you choose to stay present instead of fleeing. Every moment you choose curiosity over judgment. Every breath you take with your heart open instead of defended. You're rewiring your nervous system for connection instead of protection. And as you do this work, you begin to understand something that changes everything. The love you're seeking isn't somewhere out there waiting to be found. It's within you, waiting to be expressed. The safety you've been trying to create through distance already exists in your unshakable connection to your own divine nature. The freedom you thought required independence actually comes from surrendering to the flow of love that moves through all things. This is the great awakening of the guarded heart, not just recognizing that you want someone back, but recognizing that you are worthy of the love you seek, capable of sustaining it, and brave enough to do whatever healing work is required to receive it fully. The same hand that pushes away love is the hand that reaches for it in the darkness of loneliness. How many of you have caught yourself in this maddening contradiction? You meet someone wonderful, your heart opens like a flower towards sunlight, and for a brief, beautiful moment, you allow yourself to believe that maybe this time will be different. Then, just as the sweetness becomes too intense to deny, something inside you panics. You find reasons to doubt, you magnify small imperfections into relationship ending flaws. You create distance through 1,000 subtle and not so subtle methods until that beautiful connection withers under the drought of your withdrawal. Yet months later, when the safety of distance no longer comforts you, when the loneliness cuts deeper than the fear ever did, that same hand reaches out in the darkness, grasping for what it pushed away. This is the pendulum of the avoidant heart. The further you swing toward protection, the more violently you're pulled back toward connection. Physics applies to emotions just as surely as it applies to matter. Every action creates an equal and opposite reaction. Every wall you build creates an equivalent longing to tear it down. Michael discovered this truth in the most painful way possible. For 3 years, he had perfected a dance with Rebecca that would have been comical if it weren't so heartbreaking. He would pursue her with the intensity of a man dying of thirst who had found an oasis. She would respond, open her heart, begin to trust. Then, the moment she reciprocated fully, the moment she stopped running and turned toward him with equal intensity, his nervous system would sound every alarm it possessed. Suddenly, her texts felt too frequent. Her desire to spend weekends together felt suffocating. Her natural expressions of love felt like evidence that she was too needy. Within weeks, he would find himself creating elaborate arguments about why they weren't compatible, why he needed space, why she deserved someone who could love her the way she wanted to be loved. Rebecca would withdraw, heartbroken and confused. Michael would feel simultaneously relieved and bereft. The relief never lasted. Within months, sometimes weeks, the longing would return with compound interest. He would see her laughing with friends and remember how her joy used to light up his world. He would catch her scent on a passing stranger and feel his chest constrict with longing. The very qualities that had felt overwhelming when she offered them freely now felt like treasures he had carelessly thrown away. So he would return, apologetic and passionate, convincing both of them that he had learned something, grown somehow, that this time would be different, and it would be for a while, until her walls came down again, until she trusted again, until the cycle repeated with clockwork precision. Raise your hand if you've been Michael in this story. Keep it up. Now raise your hand if you've been Rebecca. Look around this room. See how the same hands are raised for both questions. This is because the roles in this dance change, but the music remains the same. We are all playing out variations of the same fundamental fear, that love will either engulf us or abandon us, that intimacy means losing ourselves or being left behind. But here's what Michael didn't understand, what none of us understand when we're trapped in these cycles. This pattern isn't random. It's not evidence that you're broken or that you don't deserve love. This pattern is your psyche's attempt to resolve an ancient wound that never fully healed. Somewhere in your history, love became dangerous. Maybe you were 5 years old, standing at the window watching for a parent who promised to come back and never did. Maybe you were 8, witnessing your parents' relationship explode into accusations and slamming doors, learning that love and violence can wear the same fate. Maybe you were 12, trusting a friend with your deepest secret only to have it used as ammunition when you disagreed about something trivial. In that moment, whatever moment it was for you, your brilliant young mind made a decision that saved your emotional life. Never again will I give someone the power to hurt me this bad. And so you developed strategies, sophisticated and effective strategies, for getting love without risking devastation. You learned to test people before trusting them. You discovered how to create just enough distance to feel safe while maintaining just enough connection to avoid loneliness. You perfected the art of being intimate with your armor on, close enough to receive affection, but protected enough to survive its withdrawal. These strategies worked beautifully for that wounded child. They may have been the difference between emotional survival and complete shutdown, but that child grew up, and the strategies that once protected now imprisoned. Who here remembers learning to ride a bicycle? At first, you needed training wheels. They kept you upright while you learned balance, steering, the basic mechanics of forward motion. But there came a day when those training wheels had to come off, not because they were bad or wrong, but because they were preventing you from experiencing the freedom and grace that comes with true balance. Your avoidant patterns are emotional training wheels. They served their purpose. They kept you upright when you were learning the basics of human relationship. But if you want to experience the full joy and freedom of love, they must come off. And like learning to ride without training wheels, the process requires faith, practice, and the willingness to fall a few times while you find your true balance. The first step in breaking this cycle is understanding what drives it at the neurological level. Every time you move toward intimacy, your nervous system scans for danger using data from past experiences. If past intimacy led to pain, your nervous system will interpret present intimacy as a threat, even when it's not. This isn't your fault. This isn't weakness. This is your brain doing exactly what brains are designed to do: predict danger based on historical data and mobilize defenses accordingly. Your nervous system doesn't distinguish between a saber-toothed tiger and a loving partner asking for emotional availability. Threat is threat. Protection is protection. But here's where your power lies. You can learn to update your nervous system's database. You can teach it to distinguish between past dangers and present opportunities. You can literally rewire your neural pathways to support connection instead of protection. Sarah, the woman from our earlier story, discovered this when she finally understood what was driving her pattern with Marcus. Her father had been loving but unreliable, disappearing into work stress for weeks at a time, then returning with gifts and promises as if nothing had happened. Young Sarah learned that men who love you can vanish without warning, that emotional availability is temporary, that getting too attached to someone's presence is a setup for abandonment. When Marcus showed up with his steady, consistent love, her nervous system didn't think, finally, someone reliable. It thought, this can't last. He's too good to be true. The higher I climb, the further I'll fall when he leaves. So she began the familiar dance of testing, withdrawing, and creating the very abandonment she feared. The breakthrough came when Sarah realized that her nervous system was trying to protect the 7-year-old who no longer existed. That little girl needed protection from unpredictable love, but the woman Sarah had become was capable of handling relationship challenges that would have overwhelmed her younger self. This recognition allowed her to begin the sacred work of reparenting her own nervous system. When the familiar panic arose, when Marcus wanted to plan a vacation together, when he talked about future dreams that included her, when he looked at her with eyes that saw and loved all of her instead of immediately creating distance, she would pause. She would place her hand on her heart and speak to the frightened part of herself with the compassion she wished someone had shown her at 7. I understand why you're scared. Daddy's love felt uncertain, and you learned that getting excited about being loved leads to disappointment. But Marcus isn't daddy, and I'm not 7 anymore. I can handle whatever happens. We're safe to try. This practice, speaking to your younger self with adult wisdom, is one of the most powerful tools for breaking generational patterns of avoidance. Your inner child needs to hear from your adult self that the strategies that once kept you safe are no longer necessary. But understanding the wound is only the beginning. The deeper work involves recognizing what your soul actually yearns for beneath all the protection and defense. Who here has ever felt homesick for a person? Not missing them exactly, but feeling like some essential part of yourself was walking around in their body? Raise your hand. That feeling, that sense of recognition that goes beyond the personal, beyond even the romantic. That's your soul recognizing itself in another. Beneath every avoidant pattern is a profound longing for spiritual union. Not the loss of self that we fear, but the expansion of self that comes when two whole beings choose to create something larger than either could create alone. Your avoidance isn't protecting you from love, it's protecting you from the wrong kind of love. The kind that seeks to complete rather than complement, to possess rather than appreciate, to fill an emptiness rather than overflow abundance. The universe keeps sending you people who trigger your avoidance patterns until you learn to distinguish between authentic love and attachment disguised as love. Authentic love sees you clearly and loves what it sees. Attachment projects onto you what it needs you to be and loves the projection. Authentic love wants your happiness even if that happiness doesn't include them. Attachment wants your happiness to depend on them. Authentic love encourages your growth even when that growth challenges the relationship. Attachment wants you to stay small enough to fit into their insecurity. Michael finally understood this distinction when he realized that what he feared losing with Rebecca wasn't love. It was the feeling of being necessary. Rebecca's initial need for him fed something broken in his psyche that equated being needed with being valued. But as she grew more secure in the relationship, as she developed friendships and interests that didn't revolve around him, that broken part panicked. Her independence felt like rejection because he had never learned that healthy love celebrates the other person's wholeness, rather than depending on their incompleteness. The very growth that proved the relationship was healthy triggered his deepest fear, that if she didn't need him, she wouldn't choose him. This is the sacred paradox of mature love. Only when you no longer need someone can you truly love them. Only when you're complete within yourself can you offer the gift of choice rather than the burden of necessity. Only when you've healed your own abandonment wounds can you love someone without trying to control the outcome. The work of breaking these patterns requires a kind of spiritual surgery, cutting away everything that isn't love while keeping everything that is. It means learning to tolerate the exquisite vulnerability of being seen without immediately moving to control how you're perceived. It means developing the capacity to receive love without keeping a ledger of what you owe in return. This is where daily practice becomes essential. Every morning, before your mind fills with the day's tasks and distractions, spend 5 minutes in meditation, focusing on the area around your heart. Place both hands on your chest and breathe into this space. Notice any tightness, any armor, any resistance to opening. Don't try to force anything open. Simply bring breath and awareness to whatever you find. As you breathe, repeat this truth. I am safe to love and be loved. I am safe to be seen and known. I am safe to need someone and to be needed. I am safe to stay when love feels too good to be true. Your nervous system needs to hear these truths repeatedly before it will believe them. Healing happens through repetition, through patient, consistent practice of new ways of being, not through dramatic breakthroughs that change everything overnight. Throughout the day, notice when the familiar patterns want to engage. When someone's kindness feels like too much, when their interest feels overwhelming, when their love feels too good to trust. Pause. Take 3 breaths. Ask yourself, what is my 7-year-old self afraid will happen right now? What would my wisest self do in this situation? Often you'll find that the fear is not about the present moment, but about an old story your mind is telling about what love means and what it costs. Learning to separate then from now, past from present, old fears from current reality. This is the key to freedom. In the evening, before sleep, review the day with curiosity rather than judgment. Notice moments when you chose connection over protection, vulnerability over safety, truth over control. Celebrate these moments, no matter how small they seem. Also notice moments when the old patterns kicked in. Instead of criticizing yourself, try to understand what triggered the pattern. What would you need to feel safe enough to respond differently next time? This practice of compassionate self-observation gradually rewires your neural pathways. Your brain begins to recognize that staying open doesn't lead to annihilation, that being vulnerable doesn't guarantee abandonment, that loving fully doesn't mean losing yourself. But perhaps the most profound part of this healing involves learning to approach relationships as spiritual practice rather than emotional rescue mission. When you stop looking for someone to heal your abandonment wounds and start seeing every relationship as an opportunity to practice unconditional love. Everything changes. You begin to understand that the people who trigger your avoidance patterns aren't your enemies. They're your teachers. They're showing you exactly where your healing work needs to happen. They're offering you the chance to respond differently than you ever have before, to break generational patterns that may have been passed down through your family for decades. When Michael finally grasped this, when he saw Rebecca not as the source of his panic, but as the catalyst for his growth, he was able to approach their relationship from an entirely different foundation. Instead of trying to control his feelings or her responses, he focused on becoming the kind of person who could sustain the love he claimed to want. He started therapy to understand his father's emotional unavailability and how it had shaped his beliefs about masculine vulnerability. He began meditation practice to develop tolerance for intense emotions without immediately acting to reduce them. He learned to distinguish between his voice and his father's voice, between his fears and inherited fears, between his desires and what he thought he should desire. Most importantly, he learned to see Rebecca's love not as a threat to his independence, but as an invitation to become more fully himself. Her acceptance of his quirks gave him permission to stop hiding them. Her delight in his dreams encouraged him to pursue them more boldly. Her steady presence during his moments of doubt taught him that he was lovable even when he wasn't performing. This is what becomes possible when you break the cycle of sacred self-sabotage. You discover that the love you were afraid would diminish you actually expands you. The intimacy you thought would trap you actually frees you to be more authentic than you've ever been. The vulnerability you avoided actually becomes the foundation of your greatest strength. But this transformation doesn't happen automatically. It requires daily choice, moment by moment awareness, and the courage to stay present when every instinct tells you to flee. It requires treating your healing as a sacred responsibility, not just to yourself, but to everyone whose life you touch. Because here's what few people understand. When you heal your relationship patterns, you're not just changing your own life. You're changing the trajectory of every relationship you'll ever have. You're modeling for others what's possible when someone does the work of becoming whole. You're breaking cycles that may have been unconsciously passed down through generations. Your children, should you have them, will inherit nervous systems that know how to stay present in love rather than flee from it. Your friends will experience what it's like to be loved without conditions or manipulation. Your romantic partners will learn what it feels like to be chosen from wholeness rather than need. This is the sacred dimension of personal healing work. It's never just about you. It's about the web of relationships that extends from your healed heart in all directions, touching lives in ways you may never know, but that ripple through the collective human experience like stones thrown into still water. The cycle can be broken. The patterns can change. The love you seek is not only possible, it's inevitable once you become the kind of person who can sustain it. And that person isn't someone you need to become. That person is who you are beneath all the protection, beneath all the fear, beneath all the strategies that once kept you safe, but now keep you small. The sacred work is not about adding something to yourself. It's about removing everything that isn't love until only love remains. And when only love remains, the very thing you were afraid of losing, your freedom, your independence, your sense of self, becomes unshakable because it's no longer dependent on keeping others at a distance, but on staying connected to the love that you are. Love operates by cosmic laws as precise as gravity. What you resist persists. What you embrace transforms. Show me with your hands how many of you believe that relationships are mostly luck, mostly chance, mostly about finding the right person at the right time. Now show me how many believe that relationships are mostly about becoming the right person regardless of timing. Look at how the room has shifted. This shift in understanding is the difference between hoping for love and becoming magnetic to it. The universe doesn't deal in accidents. Every person who has ever entered your life, every connection that has stirred your soul, every relationship that has challenged your patterns, all of this follows laws as predictable as the rising sun. Understanding these laws transforms you from someone who gets lucky in love to someone who consciously creates the conditions for love to flourish. The first law is the law of reflection. You don't attract who you want, you attract who you are. If you're operating from a wound, you'll magnetize others operating from the same wound. If you're desperate for validation, you'll attract those who are either equally desperate or who are repelled by desperation. If you're afraid of abandonment, you'll draw people who either confirm this fear by leaving or trigger it by getting too close. But here's the miraculous flip side. When you heal your relationship with yourself, when you become whole and complete within your own being, you begin attracting others from that same state of wholeness. Like tuning forks that vibrate at the same frequency, healed people recognize and resonate with other healed people. Marcus knew this truth before Sarah did. He had spent 3 years in therapy after his divorce, not looking for someone to complete him, but working to complete himself. He had learned to enjoy his own company, to find fulfillment in his work and friendships, to feel genuinely content with his life exactly as it was. When he met Sarah, he wasn't trying to fill a void, he was sharing an overflow. This is why Sarah's initial tactics didn't work on him the way they had worked on previous partners. When she became distant, he didn't chase. When she picked fights, he didn't engage in the drama. When she tested his commitment by becoming unavailable, he simply wished her well and focused on his own life. Her patterns met his health and had nowhere to take root. But Marcus understood something that Sarah was only beginning to learn. You cannot love someone into wholeness. You cannot fix someone else's relationship patterns through the sheer force of your consistency. You can only maintain your own center and allow others to choose whether they want to meet you there. This is the second law. Wholeness attracts wholeness. Woundedness attracts woundedness. Two halves cannot make a whole in the mathematics of love. Only two wholes can create the kind of union that multiplies rather than merely adds, that generates more love than it consumes. Who in this room has ever tried to love someone enough to heal their wounds? Raise your hands high, keep them up. Now, who has ever expected someone else to love you enough to heal yours? Same hands. This is the great spiritual trap of our time. The belief that love is medicine, that the right relationship will fix what's broken inside us. But love isn't medicine. Love is nourishment. Medicine is what you give to something that's sick. Nourishment is what you give to something that's already healthy and growing. When you approach relationships as opportunities for mutual nourishment rather than mutual healing, everything changes. The third law is the law of timing. The universe operates on perfect timing, not human timing. Sometimes we meet our greatest teachers when we're not ready to learn from them. Sometimes we encounter profound love before we're capable of sustaining it. Sometimes we must be separated from someone we care about so that we can develop the strength to love them properly. Sarah met Marcus at the exact moment her soul was ready for the curriculum he represented. Had they met 5 years earlier, she would have dismissed him as boring. Had they met 5 years later, she might have been too set in her patterns to change. But they met at the precise intersection of her readiness to grow and his readiness to be a catalyst for that growth. This doesn't mean their separation was part of some cosmic plan to bring them back together. It means their separation was part of Sarah's plan to become someone capable of the love she claimed to want. Whether Marcus would still be available when she completed this work was not guaranteed. The universe offers opportunities, not guarantees. This is where the fourth law becomes crucial. Divine timing serves growth, not comfort. What feels like the worst timing from your ego's perspective is often perfect timing from your soul's perspective. The person who breaks your heart may be preparing it to hold a love greater than you ever imagined. The relationship that ends may be making space for one that couldn't coexist with your old pattern. But none of this spiritual perspective matters if you haven't done the practical work of integration. You can understand your patterns intellectually without changing them behaviorally. You can have profound insights about your wounds without developing the skills to heal them. You can recognize your soul's curriculum without becoming a good student. The great work of becoming someone who can sustain love requires more than understanding, it requires embodiment. Every day, you must practice being the person you want to become in relationship. You must learn to tolerate discomfort without immediately moving to reduce it. You must develop the capacity to receive love without keeping score. You must cultivate the ability to give love without controlling outcomes. This is spiritual alchemy in its truest form, transforming the lead of old patterns into the gold of conscious love. Just as medieval alchemists believed they could transform base metals through precise processes and divine timing, you can transform your capacity for love through precise daily practices and trust in the perfect unfolding of your growth. Sarah's alchemy began with shadow work, looking directly at the parts of herself she had spent decades avoiding. She had to acknowledge her terror of being abandoned, her belief that she was too much for anyone to handle, her conviction that love always comes with impossible conditions. She had to feel these beliefs fully before she could question their truth. But shadow work is only the beginning. Integration requires developing new neural pathways to replace the old ones. Every day, Sarah practiced staying present when triggered instead of fleeing. She learned to communicate her needs before they became resentments. She developed the skill of receiving Marcus's love without immediately doing something to earn it. Most challenging of all, she had to learn to trust her own experience over her inherited fear. When Marcus showed up consistently, her nervous system kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. When he expressed love freely, her mind insisted he must want something in return. When he made plans that included her, her heart whispered that he would eventually change his mind. Learning to trust present moment reality over past based fear is like learning to walk on water. It requires complete faith in something your logical mind insists is impossible. But this is exactly what conscious love demands. The faith to believe that this time can be different because you are different. The art of return, whether to a specific person or to love itself, begins with taking complete responsibility for your part in what went wrong, without taking responsibility for anyone else's part. This is crucial. You cannot control whether someone will forgive you, whether they'll trust you again, whether they're even available for the love you now know how to give. You can only control whether you approach them from wholeness or from wound. When Sarah finally reached out to Marcus after 6 months of intensive inner work, she didn't apologize for who she had been or promise to be someone different. Instead, she shared what she had learned about herself and asked if he would be willing to explore what might be possible between two people who had both grown since their last encounter. I understand now, she told him, that my pushing you away wasn't about you. It was about a frightened part of me that learned love and danger wore the same face. I've been doing the work to heal that part, not so you would take me back, but so I could become someone worthy of the love I want to give and receive. Notice what she didn't do. She didn't promise she was completely healed. She didn't guarantee she would never have moments of fear or reactivity. She didn't make the reconciliation about fixing what went wrong, but about building something new from who they had become. This is conscious communication, sharing your truth without making it the other person's responsibility to fix, validate, or respond to it in any particular way. It's offering your growth as a gift, not as a bargaining chip. Marcus listened to Sarah's words, but more importantly, he felt the energy behind them. The desperate edge was gone. The need to control his response was absent. She was sharing from fullness rather than lack, from clarity rather than confusion. She had become someone who could handle whatever his response might be. But even conscious communication cannot guarantee outcomes. Marcus might have moved on. He might have been too wounded by their previous dance to risk another attempt. He might have grown in directions that no longer aligned with who Sarah was becoming. The alchemy of transformation is never about getting someone back. It's about becoming someone capable of love regardless of whether any specific person returns. This is the fifth law. Attachment to outcome blocks the very outcome you're attached to. When Sarah approached Marcus, she had to be genuinely willing for him to say no. Only from that place of non attachment could she offer authentic love, rather than disguised manipulation. Fortunately for both of them, Marcus had been doing his own work during their separation. He had used the time to examine his patterns, to understand why he had been attracted to Sarah's particular brand of emotional unavailability, to heal his own wounds around pursuing what pushed him away. They approached their reunion not as two people trying to recapture what they had lost, but as two people curious about what they might create with who they had become. This shift in perspective, from recovery to creation, changed everything. Building sustainable intimacy requires different skills than falling in love. Falling in love happens to you. Sustainable intimacy is something you create through daily choice and conscious practice. It requires learning to repair ruptures quickly rather than avoiding. It requires developing the capacity to be fully yourself while also considering the impact of your choices on another person. Sarah and Marcus had to learn to fight cleanly, to disagree without attacking, to express needs without making demands, to be angry without being destructive. They practiced the art of staying curious about each other's experience, even when it differed from their own. They developed rituals for reconnection after periods of disconnection. Most importantly, they maintained their individual spiritual practices while building shared ones. They understood that the health of their relationship depended on the health of their individual relationships with themselves and with the divine source from which all love flows. This requires daily maintenance. Every morning, before engaging with each other, they each spent time in meditation, connecting to their own center. Every evening, they practiced gratitude for what they had received from each other that day. Once a week, they had honest conversations about the state of their connection, addressing small issues before they became large ones. They learned that conscious relationship is like tending a garden. It requires daily attention, seasonal adjustments, and trust in cycles of growth and rest. There would be times of abundant flowering and times of apparent dormancy. The key was learning to trust the process rather than trying to force constant bloom. But the most profound aspect of their healing work was understanding how it rippled outward to touch every other relationship in their lives. When you heal your capacity for intimacy with one person, you heal your capacity for intimacy with all people. When you learn to love without conditions in romantic relationship, you begin loving your friends, family, and even strangers with greater freedom and depth. Sarah found herself more patient with her mother's anxiety, more compassionate toward her colleagues' difficult moods, more generous with strangers who seemed to need kindness. Her healed relationship with Marcus became a template for how she engaged with everyone. This is the ripple effect of conscious love. It doesn't stop with the person you're in relationship with. It emanates from your being like light from the sun, touching everything and everyone within its reach. Your children learn what healthy attachment looks like by watching you model. Your friends experience what it feels like to be loved without judgment or manipulation. Your community benefits from your increased capacity for compassion and understanding. When two people commit to conscious relationship, they become healing agents in a world that desperately needs examples of love that work. They prove that it's possible to grow together rather than apart, to challenge each other lovingly rather than destructively, to create union without losing individuality. But this level of relationship mastery doesn't happen accidentally. It requires specific daily practices that keep both individuals connected to their highest selves and to each other. The first practice is morning intention set. Before the day's activities scatter your attention, spend 5 minutes focusing on how you want to show up in your relationship that day. Ask yourself, what would love do today? How can I serve my partner's highest good while honoring my own needs? What patterns from yesterday do I want to transform today? The second practice is mindful listening. When your partner speaks, practice listening not just to their words, but to the feelings underneath the words, the needs behind the requests, the fears behind the listen as if their words contain medicine for your own soul's growth. The third practice is appreciation expression. Every day, Share something specific you appreciate about your partner. Not just I love you or you're wonderful, but I noticed how patient you were with that difficult situation today. And it reminded me of how safe I feel with your steady presence. The fourth practice is conscious. When disagreements arise, and they will, practice fighting for the relationship rather than against each other. Ask, how can we solve this together? Instead of, why are you being so different? Approach conflict as an opportunity to understand each other more fully rather than as evidence that you're incompatible. The fifth practice is regular relationship review. Once a week, sit down together and honestly assess the state of your connection. What's working well? What needs attention? What patterns are you noticing? What dreams are you cultivating together? These practices create what spiritual teachers call sacred container, a relationship that becomes a crucible for transformation rather than just a source of comfort. Within this container, both people can safely show their full humanity, their struggles and their growth, their fears and their dreams. But perhaps the most important understanding that Sarah and Marcus developed is that their love story is not primarily about them. Their healing, their growth, their conscious choice to love beyond their fears, this serves something much larger than their personal happiness. Every time they choose connection over protection, they weaken the collective patterns of fear that keep humanity separated from it. Every time they practice forgiveness instead of resentment, they contribute to the healing of all relationships. Every time they stay present in love, despite their conditioning to flee, they prove that transformation is possible for anyone willing to do the work. This is the ultimate purpose of conscious relationship, not just personal fulfillment, but service to the evolution of love itself. When you heal your capacity to love and be loved, you become part of the solution to humanity's greatest challenge. You prove that it's possible to bridge differences without losing authenticity, to maintain boundaries without building walls, to remain open-hearted in a world that often rewards cynicism. The person you've been seeking has been seeking you too, but not the you that hides behind defenses, not the you that loves conditionally, not the you that needs someone else to feel complete. They've been seeking the you that emerges when you stop running from love and start running toward the fullest expression of your own loving nature. This is your invitation, not to find the perfect relationship, but to become the person who creates perfect moments within imperfect relationships. Not to avoid the challenges of intimacy, but to meet them with such skill and grace that they become opportunities for deeper connection. The moment an avoidant realizes they still want someone is sacred, not because it guarantees reconciliation, but because it signals the beginning of transformation. It marks the end of seeking love outside yourself and the beginning of becoming love itself. Every day you have a choice. You can continue the patterns that keep you safe but small, or you can risk everything for the possibility of becoming who you were always meant to be. You can keep protecting wounds that happened years ago, or you can start creating love that will heal wounds for generations to come. Your soul didn't come here to play it safe. It came here to love boldly, to risk greatly, to transform completely. The question isn't whether you're capable of this transformation. The question is whether you're willing to begin today, right now, with the next choice you make about how to show up in love. The alchemy has already begun. Every time you've chosen vulnerability over safety, presence over absence, truth over comfort, you've been changing the very substance of your being from fear to love. Continue this work, trust this process, become the love you seek. The world is waiting for the gift that only you can give. The demonstration of love that has been alchemized by your unique combination of wounds and healing, challenges and growth, falling down and getting back up. This is your time. This is your love. This is your sacred return to who you have always been, beneath every wall you've built and every fear you've carried. The person you pushed away may or may not return to your life, but the person you become through this work will magnetize love in forms you cannot yet comprehend. Begin now. Love awaits your readiness to receive it fully.